He's a liar. The word, sharp and clear as splintered ice, cut through the tense quiet of the hall at the inn. It came not from the Lord of Winterfell, nor from the king, but from the small girl standing before them all, her dress smudged with dirt, her hair a wild tangle. Arya Stark's gray eyes, so like her father's, were fixed on Prince Joffrey. There was no fear in them, only fury. This was the girl Eddard Stark had chosen to bring to King's Landing. Not Sansa, his perfect southern-facing flower, but this one, his wild northern weed. He'd reasoned it would temper her, that the structure of the court would sand her sharp edges. He had thought to protect Sansa by leaving her at Winterfell, the jewel of the north, and to tame Arya by bringing her south. He was already beginning to understand the depth of his folly. Cersei Lannister's voice was silk-wrapped steel. How dare she speak to the prince in such a manner? King Robert Baratheon waved a dismissive, meaty hand, his eyes twinkling with something between annoyance and amusement. Let her speak. What happened, girl? The truth of it. Arya didn't hesitate. She didn't look to her father for permission. She pointed a finger at Joffrey, who stood half-hidden behind the towering form of Sandor Clegane. He and my sister were walking by the river. They found me and the butcher's boy, Micah, practicing with sticks. Joffrey started hurting Micah. He cut his face with his sword. It was a misunderstanding, Joffrey whined, his voice pitched high with indignation. They attacked me. Liar, Arya shouted again. His sword was steel. Ours were wood. He was going to kill him, so I hit him. Robert's bushy eyebrows rose. You hit the prince? Yes, Arya said, defiant. He deserved it. Then his dog attacked my wolf, so Nymeria bit him. She was only protecting me. The silence that followed was heavier than before. Ned could feel the architecture of his future crumbling. He had imagined this betrothal as a bridge between his house and the throne, a pact sealed in honor. He had not accounted for the simple, brutal honesty of his own daughter, crashing against the gilded deceit of the Lannisters. She admits it, Cersei hissed, stepping forward. Her beast attacked my son. It is savage and wild, like its owner. It must be put down. It was a scratch, Robert boomed, finally looking at his son's arm. By the gods, Joff, I've had worse from a tavern cat. The matter is done. It is not done, Cersei insisted, her green eyes burning. We are the royal family. An offense against the prince is an offense against the crown. A price must be paid. A wolf for a prince's blood. Ned's hand went to the hilt of his sword. The dire wolf is of the north. She is a part of my family. But it was Robert who settled it. He looked from Cersei's perfectly painted rage to Arya's unvarnished truth. He saw the sniveling boy his son was and the fierce girl Ned's daughter was. And in that moment, a flicker of the man he used to be, the man who had loved Lyanna Stark's wild spirit, made the decision. Enough! His voice was the crash of a falling mountain, and the entire room flinched. I am the king. I say the matter is settled. The girl has fire, Ned. Don't you ever beat it out of her. He turned his glare on Cersei. There will be no bloodletting over a squabble between children. We will hear no more of it. He stormed from the room, leaving a wake of stunned silence. Cersei Lannister stood frozen, her face a mask of cold fury. She had been publicly overruled. Her son had been humiliated, and she had been denied her retribution. She looked at Arya Stark, and the promise of hatred in her eyes was more terrifying than any threat. Ned pulled Arya close, his heart a cold stone in his chest. He had won the battle, but the look on the queen's face told him he had just declared a war he did not yet understand. And in Winterfell, hundreds of leagues away, a gentle direwolf named Lady rested her head on Sansa Stark's lap, safe and unaware that her life had just been spared. King's Landing was not a city. It was a cage. Arya felt it the moment they passed through the Dragon Gate. The smells of the city, sweat, smoke, waste, and perfumed rot, clung to the back of her throat. The Red Keep was a grander cage, all stone and tapestry, but a cage nonetheless. She was to be Joffrey's princess, a title that felt like a collar. Her betrothed did not forget the riverbank. His cruelty, which Sansa might have mistaken for princely moodiness, was plain and sharp to Arya. He didn't try to charm her. He tried to break her. He would mock her northern accent in front of his Kingsguard, trip her in the corridors, and whisper threats when her father wasn't near. "After we're married," he'd breathed in her ear one day, his breath sour, "I'll have Sir Meryn cut out your tongue. You won't call me a liar then." Arya didn't cry. She just stared back at him, her small face hard, and remembered. Every slight, every threat, was another name on a list she hadn't yet begun to speak aloud. Ned saw it all. The hope he'd harbored that this alliance would bring his family security had curdled into a constant, gnawing fear for his daughter. This was not a place for a wolf. He found himself watching her with the same vigilance he would a cornered animal. It was this fear that led him to a dusty chamber in the Tower of the Hand, to a man with a blade as thin as a whisper. "You are Arya Stark," Syrio Forel said, his accent strange and lyrical. He did not bow. He simply observed her. "You are the new dancing master," Arya replied, unimpressed. "And you," Syrio said with a thin smile, "are a boy, a skinny boy. That is what you are." Arya's scowl deepened. "I'm a girl. Boy, girl," he shrugged. "You are a sword, that is all. And you are here to learn the song of the sword. We begin." The lessons were a release. The water dancing was not the clumsy hacking of the boys in Winterfell's yard. It was swift, precise, and deadly. Syrio taught her to see, to listen, to be quick and quiet. He was not just teaching her how to fight. He was teaching her how to survive in the cage. While Septim Ordained despaired over Arya's torn dresses and bruised knees, Ned Stark watched the lessons with grim satisfaction. He was arming his daughter in the only way he knew how. Arya, in turn, put her lessons to use. The Red Keep, which was meant to confine her, became her training ground. Syrio taught her to be quiet, so she practiced by exploring. She found forgotten passages, winding servants' stairs, and dusty crawl spaces. She learned the castle's secret skeleton, its hidden arteries. She wasn't looking for anything in particular. She was simply mapping her escape. One evening, chasing a black cat through a cellar, she found herself in a dark, cavernous space beneath the dragon skulls. She heard voices, low and conspiratorial. Hiding behind a stone pillar, she saw two men. One was large, dressed in silks, his scent foreign and sweet. The other was the master of whisperers, Varys, his powdered face a pale moon in the gloom. "The wolf and the lion are at each other's throats," Varys murmured. "We need more time. The hand is sniffing too close to the truth." "Delay, then," the other man rumbled. "What of the girl, the wild one? Is she a problem?" "All children are a problem," Varys sighed. "This one more than most. She does not bend. She will break before she bows. The queen detests her. This makes her dangerous. If the lioness decides to swat her, Arya didn't understand it all. Wolf, lion, hand. But she understood danger. She understood the queen's hatred. She slipped away before they could sense her heart hammering against her ribs. She ran to her father's solar, bursting in without knocking. "Father," she said, breathless, "the spider was talking about you. He said you were too close. He called me the Wild One." Ned put down his quill, his face etched with worry. He had been poring over the lineage of the great houses, a book John Arryn had been reading before his death. The pieces were beginning to click into place, forming a picture so monstrous he could barely look at it. "Where did you hear this, Arya?" "Under the dragons. He was with a fat man in silks. They said the queen hates me." Ned knelt before her, taking her small, calloused hands in his. "Arya, you must be careful. This is not Winterfell. There are no games here. You listen to Syrio. You learn everything he can teach you. Do you understand?" "I understand," she said. But what she understood was not the complexity of the politics. She understood that the cage had teeth, and they were closing in. Her secret explorations were no longer a game. They were a matter of life and death. And she now knew, with a chilling certainty, that Varys had spies everywhere. But she had a secret of her own. She was a spy, too. The Hand's Tourney was a festival of violence. Knights in magnificent armor charged at one another with lances, the crack of wood on steel echoing across the field. Septa Mordane tried to explain the pageantry, the sigils, the romance of it all. Arya wasn't listening. She was watching their hands, their feet, how they shifted their weight in the saddle. She saw the brutality beneath the spectacle. Then came Sir Gregor Clegane, the Mountain. He killed a young knight from the Vale with a splintered lance through the throat. The crowd gasped. Joffrey clapped with delight. Arya felt a cold sickness in her stomach, but she didn't look away. She watched as they carried the body off, a trail of blood dark on the green grass. This, she thought, is the truth of the South. This is their song. Her father was growing more distant, his face a constant mask of grim preoccupation. He was unraveling a secret, and the closer he got, the more danger radiated from him like heat from a forge. Arya, in her wanderings, provided him with small, sharp pieces of the puzzle. "The Queen meets the Kingslayer," she told him one night, after slipping through a passage that opened behind a tapestry in an unused wing. "In the old tower. They weren't fighting." He was touching her hair. Ned went still. It was a child's observation, innocent of the true meaning, but it landed like a hammer blow. It was the confirmation he dreaded. The golden-haired children. The Baratheon black hair. The secret John Arryn had died for. It was all true. The knowledge was poison. It changed everything. His duty was clear, but the path was a viper's nest. He had to tell Robert. But Robert was surrounded by Lannisters. The king was a guest in his own castle. The final piece fell into place when Robert announced he was going on a hunt. A long hunt, leaving Ned to rule as Hand in his absence. It was a death sentence. Ned knew Cersei would not wait for Robert's return. He had to act. He summoned his household guard captain, Vayon Poole. "Ready the ship. My daughters are going home. They sail with the tide at dawn." He found Arya in her room, not embroidering, but sharpening her little sword, needle, with a whetstone. "You're sending me back," she stated. It wasn't a question. "Yes. It isn't safe for you here anymore." "Because of the Queen?" she asked. her eyes sharp. Ned was taken aback. How did you? Yes, because of the Queen. I don't want to go, she said, a hint of a childish pout in her voice. I haven't finished my lessons. You can have lessons in Winterfell, Ned said gently. This is not a request, Arya. It is a command. Her defiance crumbled, replaced by a flicker of fear. She trusted her father. If he was scared, then the danger was real. She nodded. But the dawn never came for their departure. A raven arrived in the night. The king had been gored by a boar. He was dying. The world contracted to the space of a single room. Robert, pale and sweating on his deathbed, named Ned Protector of the Realm, regent until Joffrey came of age. Ned held the king's will in his hand, the ink still fresh. But he changed the words, not my son Joffrey, but my lawful heir. It was a desperate, honorable gambit, a shield for the realm. As soon as Robert was dead, the trap sprung. Ned went to the throne room, the king's will in his hand, the city watch at his back. He meant to secure the throne for Stannis, the rightful heir. He meant to expose the queen's treason. He trusted the wrong man. I did warn you not to trust me, Littlefinger whispered, as the gold cloaks turned their spears not on the Lannisters, but on the men of Winterfell. In the Tower of the Hand, chaos erupted. Lannister guards stormed the Solar. Syrio Forel met them with a wooden practice sword. Arya, child, he said, his voice calm even as steel rang against his training blade. The door! Go now! Arya didn't need to be told twice. She had been living on a knife's edge for months. Her senses were screaming. She grabbed Needle and, as Syrio bought her precious seconds, a ballet of wood against steel, she fled. Not through the main corridors, but through the path she knew by heart. Behind the hearth, down the winding stair, into the belly of the beast. She was small, and she was fast, and she was quiet. She was everything Syrio had taught her to be. By the time the Lannister guards broke Syrio's sword and overwhelmed him, she was gone, a ghost in the castle's walls. When they dragged Ned Stark to the black cells, Cersei Lannister came to him, a vision in crimson and gold. "Where is the other one?" she demanded, her voice tight with fury. "Where is your little wolf bitch?" "She is gone," Ned said, his voice rough from the darkness. "We will find her," Cersei promised. "But it changes nothing. You will confess your treason. You will tell the world that Joffrey is the true and rightful king, and I will be merciful. I will allow you to take the black, a life of service on the wall, in exchange for peace in the realm. Refuse, and you will die." Ned looked at her from the filth of his cell. In the original turn of this fate, she would have held Sansa. She would have held a silken cord around his heart, a gentle, trusting daughter whose life depended on his compliance. With that leverage, he would have sacrificed his honor for his child's life. But Cersei had nothing. Sansa was safe in Winterfell. Arya was in the wind. He had no daughters to save. He only had his name, his honor, and the truth. "I will not," he said. Cersei's face twisted into an ugly sneer. "You think your northern honor will protect you? It will get you killed." "So be it," Eddard Stark replied. "But I will not trade the truth for a few more years in a world ruled by lies." He had made his choice. He had no idea the echoes of that choice would shake the Seven Kingdoms to their foundations. The trial was a farce. Held in the throne room, before a court of Lannister sycophants, Ned Stark was paraded in chains. Varys, ever the pragmatist, had urged this course on the Queen. An execution without a confession, without a hostage, would unite the North in a war that could not be won. They needed to break him publicly, to make him bend the knee and declare Joffrey king. It was their only hope of fracturing Robb Stark's army, which was already marching south. "Eddard Stark," Joffrey proclaimed from the Iron Throne, his voice shrill and unsteady. "You are charged with treason. How do you answer?" Ned stood tall, though his clothes were rags and his face was bruised. He did not look at Joffrey. He looked out over the court, at the lords and ladies who had once called him friend. His eyes found Littlefinger, who gave a slight, mocking bow. "I answer to the gods and the law," Ned said, his voice carrying through the silent hall. "Joffrey Baratheon has no claim to this throne." A collective gasp went through the crowd. Cersei shot to her feet. "He is confessing his treason." "He is a bastard," Ned continued, his voice ringing with the force of irrefutable truth. "Born of incest between you and your brother, Jaime Lannister. The true king, by right and by law, is Stannis Baratheon." Pandemonium. The carefully constructed stage play shattered. This was not the scene Varys had written. This was not the controlled political theater they needed. This was a man setting a fire. Joffrey's face went from pale to purple. He was screaming, spittle flying from his lips. "He's lying! He's a traitor! I want his head! Sir Elend, bring me his head!" Cersei rushed to his side. "No, your grace, we need him alive. He must take the black." Varys was already moving towards the Kingsguard, his face a mask of panic. "My king, a merciful king, is a beloved king." But Joffrey was beyond reason. He was a boy king whose authority had been challenged in the most profound way possible. He pointed a trembling finger at Ned. "I am the king. I command it. Kill him. Kill him now." Sir Elend Payne, the king's justice, a man who took no counsel but the king's command, moved forward. His greatsword slid from its scabbard. The crowd recoiled. The Stark guardsmen still held captive cried out. Ned Stark was forced to his knees. He knew this was the end. He thought of Catelyn, of Robb, of Bran and Rickon. He thought of Sansa, safe in the snows of home. And he thought of Arya, his little warrior, somewhere in the wilds of the world. He had kept them safe. He had kept his honor. He closed his eyes and prayed for them. The greatsword swung. The news that reached Robb Stark's war camp was not of a shamed traitor confessing his crimes. It was of a martyr, defiant to the last, proclaiming the truth of the succession before he was unlawfully slain on the command of a bastard boy king. The news spread through the northern army like wildfire. Grief turned to rage. The war was no longer about freeing a captive lord. It was about vengeance. In the war council tent, the great John Umber drew his sword and slammed its pommel on the table. "My lords, they have killed him. They have murdered the Warden of the North. There is no bargaining with these vipers, no peace to be made. We can't kneel to a bastard on the Iron Throne." He turned to Robb, whose young face was a mask of cold fury. "There is only one king I mean to bow my knee to, lords." He knelt, laying his sword at Robb's feet. "The king in the North!" One by one, the other lords knelt, their voices rising in a thunderous chorus. "The king in the North! The king in the North!" Robb Stark, the young wolf, was now a king, leading a holy war of retribution. He had no sisters to rescue, no father to bargain for. He had only a crown of vengeance and an army that would follow him to the gates of hell. He smashed Lannister armies at Oxcross and the Yellow Fork, his dire wolf, Grey Wind, tearing men from their saddles. He was unstoppable, a phantom of the North, and Tywin Lannister, for all his gold and cunning, could not pin him down. But war is not won by battles alone. To move his army, to strike at the heart of the Lannister power, Robb still needed to cross the river at the Twins. He still had to deal with the late Lord Frey. The pact was made, a marriage alliance. Robb Stark, king in the North, would wed one of Walder Frey's daughters upon the war's conclusion. The weight of his father's death and the crown he now wore was a heavy burden for a boy of 17. The war was a blur of blood, mud, and strategy. In the Westerlands, during the storming of the crag, he took a minor wound. The Maester sent a young noblewoman to tend to him, a healer named Jane Westerling. She was kind. Her hands were gentle. In the quiet of the sick room, she did not see a king, but a grieving boy. She listened to him speak of his father, of the home he missed, of the terrible responsibility he carried. In her arms, Robb found a brief, desperate respite from the war, a moment of peace in a world of violence. He fell in love, and in an act of youthful passion and folly, he married her. When the news reached Walder Frey, the insult was absolute. He had been spurned by a boy king for a minor Western house. His rage was a cold, patient thing. And Tywin Lannister, bogged down in a war he was not winning, saw his opportunity. A raven flew from Harrenhal to the Twins. An offer was made. A conspiracy was born between lions, leeches, and flayed men. The Red Wedding was planned as the ultimate solution to the northern problem. An apology was offered by Robb and accepted by Lord Walder. To heal the rift, Robb's uncle, Edmure Tully, would marry Rosalind Frey. The king in the north, his mother Catelyn, and all his chief bannermen would attend the wedding at the Twins as honored guests. The hall was filled with music and laughter. Wine flowed freely. The bedding ceremony was called for, and the bride and groom were carried from the hall. The doors were barred. The musicians in the gallery drew crossbows. The song changed. It was "The Rains of Castamere." Catelyn Stark felt the cold dread first. She saw Rose Bolton's chainmail beneath his tunic. The first bolt struck Robb in the shoulder. Chaos erupted. Men were cut down where they sat, drowning in their own blood and spilled wine. Catelyn, screaming, saw Rose Bolton walk to her son, the king in the north. "The Lannisters send their regards," Bolton said, and drove a dagger into Robb's heart. The young wolf was dead. The northern army was shattered. Tywin Lannister had won. He had decapitated the rebellion. But a body can live for a time without a head. A kingdom is not so simple. The news traveled north, a black wind of sorrow and despair. It reached Winterfell, a castle held not by a boy lord, but by a young woman who had been forced to become its ruler. Sansa Stark had spent the past year not learning songs and courtesy, but learning governance. She had listened to Maester Luwin, sat in council with old lords, managed supplies for an army hundreds of leagues away, and dispensed justice in her brother's name. The girl who had dreamed of knights and princes was gone, buried under the weight of duty. Her direwolf, Lady, was always at her side, a silent, powerful presence. Maester Luwin found her in the great hall, standing before her father's empty chair. He carried the raven scroll in a trembling hand. He didn't need to read it. She saw the truth in his tear-filled eyes. "My lady," he began, his voice cracking. "He's dead, isn't he?" Sansa's voice was quiet, brittle as ice. "My brother and my mother." Luwin could only nod, the tears finally overflowing. The lords of the houses still in the north were gathered. Lord Manderley of White Harbor, Wyman, a man of immense girth and cunning, Galbart Glover of Deepwood Moat, the fierce young Lady Lyanna Mormont of Bear Island. They had come to Winterfell to receive their orders from their king. Now they stood in stunned silence as the news of the massacre at the Twins settled over them like a shroud. The rebellion was over. The king was dead. The cause was lost. Despair hung heavy in the ancient hall. Then Sansa Stark moved. She walked to the high seat, her father's seat, and turned to face them. Her face was pale, her red hair a splash of fire in the gray hall, but her eyes were pure Stark. They were her father's eyes, filled with a sorrow so deep it had become steel. "They murdered my father," she said, her voice clear and strong, carrying to every corner of the hall. "They murdered my brother. They murdered my mother. They think they have murdered the North." She paused, letting the words hang in the air. Lady, at her feet, raised her head and let out a low, rumbling growl that was more threat than sound. Lord Bolton and Lord Frey betrayed them, but it was the Lannisters who gave the order. They sit in the south on their stolen throne, and they think we are broken. They think the wolf is dead. She looked from Manderley to Glover to Mormont, her gaze lingering on each of them. "My brother was the king in the north. That title is now his by right of blood." She looked past them, to the empty space where her youngest brothers should have been. "But Bran and Rickon are gone. I am the only Stark left in Winterfell. I am the only Stark left in the north." A long silence. The fate of a kingdom rested in this moment. Then Wyman Manderley, his fat face grim, drew his greatsword. The sound of steel scraping from a scabbard was shockingly loud. He took a heavy step forward and knelt, the stones groaning under his weight. He planted the sword's point on the floor before him. "The king in the north is dead." His voice boomed, thick with emotion. He looked up at the young woman on the dais. "Long live the queen in the north." Galbart Glover drew his sword and knelt. "The queen in the north." Lady Lyanna Mormont, a girl no older than Arya had been when she left, stood on a bench to be seen. "The queen in the north!" she squeaked, her voice fierce. One by one, every lord, every knight, every man-at-arms in the great hall drew their steel and knelt before Sansa Stark. The cry echoed off the ancient stones, a roar of defiance, a promise of vengeance. "The queen in the north! The queen in the north! The queen in the north!" The Lannisters and their allies had slaughtered a king, but they had not ended the war. They had given it a martyr, and they had created a queen. A quiet, dutiful girl who had learned to rule in the heart of winter, with a wolf at her side and ice in her veins. The North remembered. And in the Riverlands, a different Stark girl, a ghost with a sword and a list of names, was making her own way through a broken kingdom, a wolf in the shadows, her own song yet to be sung.